Hello and welcome back everyone for your favorite YouTube chess channel, Chess Sensei. For today's video we are going to learn how to dominate your games with the French defense as black. First of all, let's start with what is the French defense, and it comes after e4, e6, d4, and black responds with pawn to d5. Now in this position there is a lot of variations, which includes pawn to e5, knight to c3, knight to d2, and the exchange variation, which is the more simple one, and we will start with the most simplest one, and we will complicate things after variation. So stick around, because I will cover so many traps and so many interesting lines in the French, so make sure to follow that. So after white goes knight to f3, we don't want to copy white and play knight to f6, and I will show you why in just a second. We want to put this bishop into d6, into the most active diagonal for the dark square bishop, which is this diagonal. So of course white is going to do the same, because white's bishop, also the best square, is to d3, and we will continue with knight to e7. Now the idea behind knight to e7 and not going knight to f6 is to challenge this white light square bishop, because it is the most important piece for white. So after white castles, black castles also, white will most likely continue with knight to c3. Now we want to go bishop to f5, but we don't want to blunder our d5 pawn, so here just make sure to not blunder it and just play c6, just to ensure that d5 is protected well by the pawn. And after bishop to e3, black goes bishop to f5, and we get a simple variation after bishop takes f5, knight takes f5, and the position, if black can trade the light square bishops, then most likely the game is equal and black have equalized and achieved his goals from the opening, and which is to trade the light square bishops and have a really nice easy play with something like rook to e8, knight to d7, queen to c7, and we are going to play a slow and quiet game with the black pieces, so there is no much trouble in this variation specifically. So let's come back to the main position. So let's say here white is trying to advance and get an early space advantage over black and put his pawn into e5, which most beginners or intermediate players like to play this variation. So in this variation, after pawn to e5, white is just saying you wouldn't be able to develop the knight to f6 and either the bishop to d6. So here you want to attack the base of the chain, right? You want to try to weaken this pawn, and trying to weaken this pawn is by also trying to hit the base of the chain of the pawns and going pawn to c5 and try to put pressure on white's center very quickly. So white is most likely going to defend with a pawn, because if he in this position defends with a piece, then after pawn takes d4, knight takes d4, we will get an easy development and easy putting pressure on the pawn on e5, and most likely black is better and black has really no much trouble in these positions. So after pawn to c3, which is the most logical move to protect the pawn on d4, now we want to continue with knight to c6, just trying to put more pressure. Remember, you don't want to release the tension too early and trade the pawns on d4, because white can go wrong, and I will show you how white can go wrong. Now knight to f3 is the best move, of course, to defend the d4 pawn, and now we want to play queen to b6, just adding more pressure towards the pawn on d4. Now here there is a trap for white, so make sure do not fall into, which goes after bishop to d3. Now the pawn on d4 might seem free, but it's not really free, because after black exchanges on d4 and goes out knight takes d4, knight takes d4, queen takes d4, unfortunately there is bishop to b5 check and we will lose our queen. One sample line is bishop to d7 trade, and white is winning the game. So make sure to not fall into that. So let's come back. So in this position, bishop to d3 is a dubious move. It's not really the best move for white. White is just playing hope chess and trying to say, okay, he might fall into. But after we go bishop to d7, then there is no much play for white. So let's say white's castles, then we will just grab the pawn on d4 and black is going up a pawn, and white is in a lot of trouble, as also the pawn on e5 is hanging. And this is an example of how white can really go wrong. The other one that white can go wrong is to go bishop to e3, right? Just defending the pawn on d4 and saying, okay, if he trades, then my pawn is defended on d4. But unfortunately, there is queen takes b2, and black will also be winning in this line, because of course black goes up a pawn. He is hitting the rook, having really initiative. And after knight to d2, there is queen to c3, just hitting this bishop. And yeah, white pieces are really ugly over here. They are crammed on the middle of the board. And we will just continue by knight ge7 and try to put our knight to f5 and play a really easy game. So let's say that white doesn't go wrong, and in this position plays a3, which is the best move for white, because after white goes a3, white is trying to go b4 and release the tension on the center. So in this position, I will recommend you going knight to e7, because after knight to e7, pawn to b4, then after the exchange on d4, you can put your knight on f5 and add more pressure into white. So white is most likely going to be forced to play bishop to e3 or bishop to b2 to defend the d4 pawn. But after that, you can try to undermine it more with pawn to f6. But just be sure, when you play f6, be sure that there is no queen can land on h5 or give you any of these annoying checks, and you will be fine. Okay, so let's come back to the main position. Now there is knight to c3, which is the classical line, or also some people call it the Chigorin variation. Now in this line, you want to play bishop to b4, which is the winner variation. Now, why I recommend bishop to b4 specifically? Of course, you don't want to go d takes e4, knight takes e4, and knight to f6. Yeah, this line has really no problems for black, but it's just black is just saying, yeah, I am worse, I got a bad bishop on c8, and white is the one for the choice. Yeah, it's mainly equal, we trade pieces, and the game most likely will end in a draw, but you don't want to really do that, especially after something like bishop to g5, bishop to e7, and takes, and after knight to f3, yeah, white is the one for the choice here. White is a little bit better. You will always defend this position with black, so hence why I don't recommend you going pawn takes e4, but it's also completely fine if you want to. So I recommend playing bishop to b4, which is the winner variation. Now after bishop to b4, you are pinning the knight to the king, so you are straightforward threatening to win a pawn on e4. Now after this move, there is a lot of options for white, but there is the only move, which is e5, is just to try to keep an advantage for white, is going pawn to e5. So after pawn to e5, here I want to go c5, right? And that's how we learned this structure in the past variation, is that we are trying to put pressure on d4 really early on. But I don't recommend pawn to c5 because it gets messy after queen to g4. You will have to go knight to g7, and after queen to g7, rook to g8, queen takes h7. Now, probably black is better after c takes d4, but I won't recommend you going into this after something like a3. Then there is queen to a5 for black, because if white takes, white will lose the rook, and we are just threatening to win the knight. White's best choice to just sack the rook, and after white sacking a rook, to just drop back with the knight, just to defend this bishop. But you know, these variations are super messy and super tactical and sharp. So be aware if you want to go to this kind of type of positions. You are all good. This is all good for black, but you just want to make sure that you don't blunder pieces easily, because it's super sharp, super easy to go wrong. So hence why in these positions I like to go knight to e7, because if white now plays queen to g4, then I will just castle my king. Now you are probably wondering, why are you castling? Isn't the g pawn is pinned, and after bishop to h6, you will be forced to go g6 and blunder your rook? Now I will say some part of this is true and some is not, because after bishop to h6, then black goes knight to g6, and actually black is the one winning here, because black is hitting this bishop. Black is also ready to go c5, so probably white will need to waste a tempo with bishop to g5, but now I will just go f6, and after pawn takes, I am hitting this bishop again, and if the bishop comes back to h6 to hit the rook, then now there is this really crazy move e5, and I will, yeah, you know, it's really complicated. You sacrifice all over the house over here, but after bishop takes f8, then bishop takes c3, pawn takes c3, and this is just winning for black because white will drop the queen. So it gets super tactical and super messy early on, so make sure that you don't really wanna make any complications, but in case if it's the complications in your advantage, then make sure to go into that. So knight to e7 completely avoids this queen to g4 line. So after knight to e7, probably white's best try to go knight to f3. And now I will try to put pressure on the center, as this is the main idea. And now I will go for a completely complex position, and I will get black only the one who is attacking. So stay tuned for this variation, because this is probably the most likely variation you are gonna get. So after pawn to c5, white is going to go a3 to force black to trade on c3. And now after the trade, I want you to go queen to a5. And after queen to a5, you are immediately putting pressure on this c3 pawn. So probably white's most logical move is to defend it, and it is the best move is with going to bishop to d2. And after bishop to d2, I want you here to go pawn to c4, just completely cutting this d3 square for the light square bishops, so the light square bishop can't develop to d3. And after bishop to e2, white is trying to castle, and now we are going to go knight c6. White is going to castle, and we will go bishop to d7, and you can see where this is going. We are going to castle queen side and try to checkmate white in the king side. So let's say rook to b1, trying to put pressure over here. Then we are just going to castle long and let the king defend this. And after knight e1, we are going to go rook to g8 and try to go g5, h5, and try to attack like a lunatic, and just going queen to d8, knight to f5. And there is not really much play for white in the queen side. Now we can imagine that white, like if we imagine, let's just say a sample variation after something like f4. Now we are going to go knight to f5, and of course any king pawn moves is probably not good for white. So hence why white is going to be really scared after when he goes f4. So let's just say queen to c1, trying to get his queen to b2 and try to go for checkmate on b7. And now we are just going to go g5. And yeah, we don't care. I know it's a free pawn, but whenever black takes some pawns in his king side, then probably this will give us more open files for our rook to get play with. Like you can just imagine to go rook to g6 and rook to g8 and just try to checkmate white in the king side. Now of course the engine does not care and goes bishop to f6, and after rook to g8 it's saying that yeah, you don't have anything, I can just go bishop to h5, and the knight is defending on g2. But I know that the engine is really crazy, and the engine, yeah, give it a pawn and it will take it no matter what and just win the game easily. But I am talking about humans here. No human will go bishop takes d5, and even if white goes bishop takes g5, then even this sacrifice is probably good for black, because black is going to get this open g file, and there is no play for white on the queen side. So yeah, we can just go something like pawn to g5, and after queen to b2, for example, just trying to attack, right? Then after white's trying to attack, now probably after b6, white has got no much play. But the problem is we trap our queen on the queen side. We need this queen in this side of the area. Just try to deliver checkmate, right? So hence why we want to drop our queen back to c7 before we play b6. And now in the next move we are just going to go b6, and all of these pieces are not really doing any much. And let's say white gets, like, if you give white here 3 or 4 moves, then white can't really create an attack on the queen side, so our king here is super safe. We are going to go b6, and even if white tries to go a4, a5, our knight is always covering this square, and our king can really run back to the center where the center is closed, and black is the one who is attacking here. Now ideas of f6 might be there, ideas of h5, g5, h4, and try to push for g3 is there. So black is just trying to checkmate white, and white is really doesn't really have a clear plan to go to. Now let's go back and cover the last variation, which is knight to d2. Now after sorry, not knight c3, knight to d2. So after white goes knight to d2, this is the Tarrasch variation. The Tarrasch variation is just white saying, you know what, I don't really want to go into some bishop to b4 lines, and it gets messy, it gets complicated. I wanna play slow game and really positional easy game as white. So in this position, there is the move knight to f6 and forcing white to go into this line, but it gets really crammed for black after pawn to f4 and pawn to c5. Yeah, this is playable and this is a variation, but I will recommend you more than that, which is the move knight to c6, which is the secret move for our channel. Now this move is really tricky because the most logic, first of all, the knight hits the pawn on d4. If white exchanges on d5, then after e takes d5, we actually transpose into the exchange French, but this knight is misplaced on d2. The knight would love to go to c3 again, so white won't even consider that. So after knight to c6, we are just hitting the pawn on d4. Now the most obvious move, which is c3, is to guarding the pawn on d4, and yeah, if black takes, then white takes. Now here there is this secret move, which is the most stronger move in this position, which is pawn to e5. Now after pawn to e5, you are opening this diagonal for this bishop on c8, and yeah, just trying to crash the center and try to prove that knight d2 is really a slow move for white, and white can't really play like this. And yeah, you will, from here, all of the moves are really getting forced. After e takes d5, queen takes d5, pawn takes e5. After knight takes e5, of course the knight is good here, controlling the both square, so white light square can develop to d3 easily, and we just want to continue with bishop to e6 and long castle. Now there is a forcing variation here, which probably most attacking players won't like, and white can use this against them, which is going knight to f3. Now of course, if you trade, then there is no problem. After queen takes f3, the queens will come off the board, and white has really no problems. So here I recommend you playing bishop to e6, but after bishop to e6, bishop to e2, white is just trying to castle. Now here there is this line, but you will get the choice to play it or not, which is to going pawn knight to d3, and after knight to d3, white is really forced to take, and after queen takes, of course the queen is cutting the king off from castling, so white can't castle. So after queen to e2, the queens will come off the board and long castle for black. Black has the two bishop or the bishop pair advantage, and he will get a really easy development and really easy play. The rook on h8 will get to e8, and black game is super easy, and white is the one who is struggling here. Yeah, I know this is a little bit boring, but you know, this is a really comfortable end game for black as well. If you don't want to go into this variation, so in this position you don't want to go knight to d3 and just castle queenside and try to go after white when white castles kingside. Now these positions are of course super complicated. White will get an attack on the queen side, and black will get an attack on the king side after something like knight to f6. Now white is probably going to go b4 and try to throw pawns on black territory. Then after bishop to d6, you know, putting your pieces on the best squares over here, or the most potential attacking. You will continue with h5, knight to g4, and maybe try to sack a pawn on g5 and get the other rook to the attack. And white is probably going to try to do the same things with queen to a4, rook to b1, and maybe trying to push b5, c4, and try to go for b6 later on. It gets messy, but both sides have chances, and both sides have chances to win or lose, but probably there won't be any draws in such type of openings. Now, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you really like to watch some or to play some really crazy gambits with black, we made a video on the Russo gambit, the last video, so make sure to check it out, and goodbye.